The Dragonmaids are a small archetype of dragons, which have a gimmick of returning themselves to the hand in order to special summon the high-level versions of themselves, as well as activating and triggering a lot of their effects. And in this list, we'll be going over the 10 best ones of this small little archetype. And at number 10, we have Parlor Dragonmaid. This is a level 3 monster with 500 attack. Pretty much all the low-level Dragonmaid monsters have exactly 500 attack. And it simply has 2 effects, where if this card is normal or special summoned, you get to send any Dragonmaid card from your deck to the graveyard, except another copy of this card. Additionally, it has the effect where at the start of the battle phase, you can return this card to your hand in order to special summon a level 8 Dragonmaid monster from your hand or graveyard. And both of its effects are hard once per turn. Now, there are 4 high-level Dragonmaid monsters, which are all level 7 and 8 dragons. So this one is specifically made in order to tag out into the 2 level 8 dragons, neither of which will actually be on this list. And what's interesting about the effect is that if you're able to bring out the dragon from the graveyard, its ability is a +1 in card advantage, since its cost is to send the card back to your hand. And this is kind of a standard with a lot of the Dragonmaid cards. A lot of their effects revolve around sending themselves back to the hand, which doesn't actually lose you advantage, just board presence. So they have the potential to outgrind control decks, with just the inherent advantage a lot of the cards have based on how their effects work. Which is why a lot of the Dragonmaids are so cautious about granting additional card advantage, and why Parlor only sends the card to the graveyard and does nothing else on its summon. This does allow you to set up a lot of plays in Dragonmaids, as we'll talk about a lot of the other cards that are useful in the graveyard later on in the list. But suffice to say, most of the Dragonmaids work like Parlor, where they have an effect when they're summoned, and they're able to tag out into the level 7 and 8 Dragonmaids in the graveyard for advantage during the battle phase. And at number 9, we have Dragonmaid Changeover. This is the fusion spell card of the archetype, and simply has the effect where you can fusion summon a dragon fusion monster by using materials from your hand or field as the fusion materials. So basically a pure polymerization-like effect, which is one of the worst kinds of effects that an archetype-specific fusion card can have. But it does make up for that with its other effect, where if this card is in your graveyard, you can return 1 Dragonmaid monster you control to your hand in order to add this card to your hand. And since remember, returning the Dragonmaids to your hand doesn't actually lose you card advantage, this effect to add itself back to your hand is a pure +1 in card advantage, which is why it's a very reasonable hard once per turn on this effect. And because this card basically returns itself to your hand each turn for a +1, most Dragonmaid decks will only play a single copy of this card, or 2 if they're worried about one of them being DD crowed. And the Dragonmaid archetype does kind of have a really good fusion monster, which is worth the inherent -2 that's required in order to bring it out. And at number 8, we have House Dragonmaid. This is a fusion monster for the archetype, which simply requires a Dragonmaid plus any dragon monster as its materials. And it has the effect where, once per turn during the standby phase, you can special summon a Dragonmaid monster from your hand or graveyard that has 1 level higher or lower than a Dragonmaid monster you control. Its other effect is that if a face-up dragon monster you control returns to your hand, you can destroy 1 monster your opponent controls. And while its first effect to special summon a monster is once per turn, the second effect to destroy a monster is not. So, if you have this card in the field and your Dragonmaids are doing their thing where they're returning themselves to your hand, you can just destroy all of your opponent's monsters essentially. Although I will say, House Dragonmaid is not the good fusion monster I was talking about with Dragonmaid Changeover. It's a fine fusion monster, but the archetype definitely has a better one, which is a little bit more versatile and useful. The ability to destroy your opponent's monsters is tied more to a gimmick and not really worth the -2 required in order to bring this card out normally. Even if you can go +1 with its special summon effect, you can't actually use that effect until the next turn when the standby phase happens. Although if this thing stays in the field long enough, it will eventually gain the advantage lost in order to bring it out. But with a lack of protection, it probably won't stay around very long. And at number 7, we have Dragonmaid Hospitality. This is a normal spell card, which is the extender of the deck, and allows a lot of their plays to be a lot more consistent, as it has the effect where you can special summon a Dragonmaid monster from your hand or graveyard, then you can send a Dragonmaid monster of the same attribute but a different level from your deck to the graveyard. And since the ability to send a card to the graveyard is done after you special summon, and is definitely not the good part of the effect, it does work as an excellent ash bait, since your opponent can use hand traps in order to stop the mill effect, but that's not the good effect of the card, which still goes through. This thing is just really good for getting a Dragonmaid monster in the field so that you can use one of their summon effects, and of course being able to get one from the graveyard is just even better for extending plays, or allowing your plays to exist at all if your opponent shuts down some of your cards with negates. It's probably the best spell card that exists for Dragonmaids, even if their fusion spell card is essentially a +1 on return. And at number 6, we have Dragonmaid Ernus. This is one of the high-level Dragonmaid monsters, which usually exists that it can special summon from the graveyard when one of your lower-level Dragonmaids are using their tag-out effect. However, Out of all the high-level main deck Dragonmaid monsters, this is the only one that has a useful effect, as it has a hand effect where you can discard this card from your hand in order to special summon one of your low-level Dragonmaid monsters from your hand. So it's another extender like Dragonmaid Hospitality, except for cards in your hand instead of being able to choose the graveyard as well. Although its effect is a hard once per turn, like most of the Dragonmaid cards. The archetype is very careful about not allowing too much advantage, so pretty much all of their effects of every card in the archetype has a hard once per turn slapped on them. They were super future-proof in the archetype, so it won't be broken at all. Dragonmaid Ernus also has the effect, where it can't be destroyed by card effects if you control a fusion monster, and if it's on the field, at the end of the battle phase you can return this card to your hand in order to special summon a level 2 Dragonmaid monster from your hand. So if you use one of the level 2 Dragonmaid monsters in order to tag out into this one, then you can bring it back at the end of the battle phase, which might allow you to use one of their effects, as all of the low-level Dragonmaid monsters can activate their effects if they're normal or special summon. Although since all of them have hard once per turns on their effects, there is no doubling up with their effects during the turn if you're tagging out with them and bringing them back. And at number 5, we have Kitchen Dragonmaid. This is a low-level main deck Dragonmaid monster, so it has an effect on summon, and then an effect to tag out with a level 8 dragon monster from your hand or graveyard during the battle phase. And its summon effect allows you to add a Dragonmaid monster from your deck to your hand, but then you have to send a Dragonmaid monster from your hand to the graveyard. So again, like Parlor Dragonmaid, its effect on summon is being real careful not to give you any extra advantage, because of how easy it is to trigger all of their effects. Although its effect is really good for setting up the play you want to do with Dragonmaids, because it allows you to set up your graveyard with a Dragonmaid card, but in a way that allows you to maybe add that card to your hand instead, unlike Parlor, which purely sends a card to the graveyard, which actually does put it way ahead of a lot of the other Dragonmaid cards, surprisingly enough. The archetype is just full of a whole bunch of really mediocre monsters and cards, which have the potential to give you a whole bunch of card advantage if they're able to stick around long enough, and they're heavily carried by 1 or 2 broken cards that allow the whole thing to work. And at number 4, we have Nurse Dragonmaid. This is like all the other low-level Dragonmaid monsters. It has the same 2 effects. It can tag out into a level 7 Dragonmaid monster during the battle phase, and it has a summon effect that allows you to special summon a Dragonmaid monster from your graveyard, just as long as it's level 4 or lower. Nurse Dragonmaid is the first Dragonmaid main deck monster that allows you to go +1 in card advantage on this list so far, which is why it's so high up on the list. Nurse Dragonmaid is the reason why you want to use cards like Kitchen and Parlor in order to get cards into the graveyard, because then you can bring them out with Nurse Dragonmaid. And it's also why cards like Dragonmaid Ernus and Dragonmaid Hospitality are so important. You would use your normal summon on either Kitchen or Parlor in order to get a Dragonmaid monster in the graveyard. Then you can use one of your extenders in order to bring out Nurse Dragonmaid, which will allow you to use that card you sent to the graveyard in order to maybe use their effect as well. And of course, getting another dragon monster in the field is very valuable even if you can't use their effect, thanks to Hieratic Seal of the Heavenly Spheres. This is a Link 2 monster with 0 attack and just requires 2 dragon monsters as its materials. And it has the effect that if it's in the extra monster zone and it's your opponent's turn, you can tribute a monster in your hand or field in order to return 1 face-up card in the field to the hand. Additionally, if this card is tributed, you can special summon any dragon monster from your hand or deck, but its attack and defense become 0. So Hieratic Seal of the Heavenly Spheres is heavily played alongside Dragonmaids, and Nurse Dragonmaid allows you to go into the card by itself. You can use its effect to bounce one of your opponent's cards during their turn as a form of disruption by just tributing itself, which will then activate its tribute effect to special summon another Nurse Dragonmaid from your deck, which will then special summon another one of your Dragonmaids from the graveyard, which might allow you to set up more stuff, and then go into another Hieratic Seal of Heavenly Spheres during another turn, while proccing your Dragonmaid's hard once per turn effects during your opponent's turn to get even more value out of them. Especially since, even though the Dragonmaid monsters will have 0 attack and defense, as soon as your opponent's battle phase starts, it will be able to tag out into the level 7 or 8 versions of themselves. So its low stats don't matter, as it will just return to the hand so you can use them again on your next turn. Hieratic Seal of the Heavenly Spheres really allows the Dragonmaids to take advantage of their battle phase gimmick, which is normally not that useful on its own. Also, a side note, Nurse Dragonmaid has alternate art for TCG and the OCG, where in the TCG they remove the top 2 buttons from her nurse's outfit. And because of this, all of the Dragonmaid cards which feature Nurse Dragonmaid in their artwork have alternate forms as well, just so they can remove those 2 buttons, which is just an amusingly random piece of censorship that seems completely unnecessary. And at number 3, we have Dragonmaid Tidying. This is a trap card which has the effect where you can return 1 dragon monster you control to your hand in order to return 1 card your opponent controls or in their graveyard to their hand. So, being a trap card, it's spell speed 2, and can be used during your opponent's turn in order to disrupt plays, similar to Compulse or a DD Crow. And being able to do either of those effects is useful enough, although if that's all the card did, it wouldn't be this high on the list. Its good effect is that if this card is in your graveyard, you can banish this card in order to special summon a Dragonmaid monster from your hand or graveyard, but it's returned to the hand during the end phase. So basically, it's another extender like Dragonmaid Hospitality, and it also has a hard once per turn just like Dragonmaid Hospitality. And in fact, it shares its hard once per turn between both of its effects. Now, what makes Dragonmaid Tidying so good is the spell speed 2 nature of its effect. You can use this card during your opponent's turn to special summon any Dragonmaid monster, which means you can use it right at the start of the battle phase in order to activate its effect that allows it to tag out into a bigger Dragonmaid immediately, which could be a +2 in card advantage, which doesn't leave the Dragonmaids vulnerable to any kinds of attacks or disruption, unless they negate one of the cards in that initial combo. Even if you don't do that, you can just use it during your turn if you send it to the graveyard directly with Parlor Dragonmaid, and just use it as an extender to get out more Dragonmaids and use their effects. And if you don't do that, you can instead just set the card and use it as disruption with its first effect, though it's basically just a more useful Dragonmaid Hospitality, and Dragonmaid Hospitality is an incredibly useful card already. And in fact, Dragonmaid Tidying was played in non-Dragonmaid decks, when Dragon Link decks were playing a small Dragonmaid engine in order to extend their plays, thanks entirely to the next spot on this list. And at number 2, we have Chamber Dragonmaid. This is a rare level 4 Dragonmaid monster, and has the effect that when it's summoned, you get to add a Dragonmaid spell or trap card from your deck to your hand. And this is the only low-level Dragonmaid monster which is a pure +1 in card advantage from the deck, and is definitely the best target for all of the Dragonmaids to try to get on the field or in the graveyard. That way they can start recycling its effect every turn, thanks to Dragonmaid Nurse or House Dragonmaid. It also allows you to tag out into level 7 or higher Dragonmaid monsters, instead of only a level 7 or 8, like all the other low-level Dragonmaid monsters, since it doesn't specify specific levels. Although, since it's level 4, it can't be brought back with one of the level 7 or 8 Dragonmaid monsters, since they do specify a specific level of 2 or 3. And it's the only Dragonmaid monster which doesn't have a high-level Dragon Form card, which is entirely reasonable because it's easily the best main deck Dragonmaid. And it was kind of released alongside Dragonmaid Tidying and the number 1 spot on this list in a way to make Dragonmaids less terrible, because the original wave of Dragonmaid monsters did not include the top 3 cards on this list, and the fact that the top 3 cards on this list are easily the best Dragonmaid cards should show you something about how they kinda made a mistake with their first release. The Dragonmaids had a neat gimmick where they could potentially recur a whole bunch of advantage, but they were too balanced in how they accomplished that. So with the top 3 cards being added to their archetype later, they were finally able to enjoy some competitive meta success, as all they needed was a card like Chamber Dragonmaid to just give them a +1 in card advantage when it was recurred. And since it can search out Dragonmaid Tidying, Chamber Dragonmaid and Dragonmaid Tidying were included in a small mini-engine within Dragon Link decks, because Chamber Dragonmaid was a level 4 dragon monster that could search out a card from the deck, which could then special summon it again during the next turn. So searching out a single Chamber Dragonmaid was like getting the same card on the field twice, thanks to Dragonmaid Tidying, as long as you had a way to get into the graveyard, which was pretty easy, because you could just use it like normal as a form of disruption, which basically makes Chamber Dragonmaid a +2 in card advantage with extra steps, which actually made it a high priority target to be special summoned from the deck with Guard Dragon LP, before it was banned. You know a card is good when it's played outside of its archetype, even though its effects are very archetype specific. And at number 1, we have Dragonmaid Sheou. This was the new fusion monster added to the archetype, which is kind of the sole reason the whole archetype is playable in a competitive environment. Its materials are simply a Dragonmaid monster plus a level 5 or higher dragon monster. And then with the baseline attack of 3500, which is really good for a 2 material fusion monster, it has the effect that when your opponent activates their card or effect, you can negate the activation and destroy that card. But then you have to return this card to your extra deck, and if it returns there successfully, you can special summon a House Dragonmaid from your extra deck. So basically it tags out into House Dragonmaid in order to activate its negate. It also has an effect during the standby phase where you can just special summon a level 9 or lower Dragonmaid monster from your hand or graveyard. And both of its effects are a hard once per turn. So a 3500 attack monster with negate is actually really good, and the cost for activating the negate is just to tag out into the archetype's other fusion monster, so you don't lose advantage. And Dragonmaid Sheou kind of fixed all the problems the archetype had. The fusion spell card was a neat gimmick of going +1 every turn, but they didn't really have a good fusion monster that was worth initially going -1 to bring out. Dragonmaid Sheou is definitely worth going into, as a negate is one of the best effects you can have on a boss monster. It also has enough attack to beat over pretty much anything normally, unless the monster just has some kind of battle-related effect, or is Ultimate Conductor Tyranno. Additionally, if this card stays in the field, it just allows you to special summon Dragonmaids every turn, but even easier than House Dragonmaid can, which requires you to have other Dragonmaid monsters on the field in order to really use this effect to bring them out. So the main goal of Dragonmaid decks is just to bring out Dragonmaid Sheou and Heretic Seal the Heavenly Spheres. Sheou provides negates in order to disrupt plays and bring out either Chamber Dragonmaid or Nurse Dragonmaid to go +2 during the standby phase, or to have House Dragonmaid do the same thing if it tags out early. Then you use the materials it brings out in order to make sure you can go into other copies of Heretic Seal of the Heavenly Spheres, which provides you another form of disruption during your opponent's turn, which can also further your plays when it special summons either Nurse Dragonmaid or Chamber Dragonmaid from your deck in order to go +1. And the card is just so good in the archetype and fits with everything the archetype is trying to do and make work, that it's kind of hilarious that it was added as a band-aid to make the archetype more playable, and wasn't released alongside the full first set. As I remember when the first wave of Dragonmaids came out, I made a 40-minute video trying to get the archetype to just work, because of just how mediocre they are without the top 3 cards on this list. So these 3 cards prove that all it takes in order to make a mediocre archetype more playable is just to give them 3 really good cards, with one of them being a boss monster that has a negate. Alright, and that's the list. Dragonmaids are an unusually popular archetype, where even when the first wave of Dragonmaid monsters came out, and they were incredibly mediocre, a lot of the cards were still incredibly expensive despite not being that rare, which makes sense why they added 3 support cards that made them way more playable. But anyway, if you have any ideas for future videos just like this one, I'd love to hear about them down in the comments.